You can almost read someone else's behavior if you're not noisy yourself. You have the ability to perceive. Perception's a function that you don't have any noise or inner commentary going on, so you can actually read everyone else's noise. That's really what good perception is.
Today we're going to focus on the core connections, and one of the things that is, we had a shot on the back of the core confusions, which is really one of the first portals that you learn about in the core series. Core connections is almost bolted on all the time to core confusion. So I just want to jump in, and on the last episode we basically talked and started to describe what a core confusion was and how that works, and this one I really want to focus on what the core connections are. So let's just introduce core connections. Yes, if you want to introduce core connections, then we'll jump into it.
Sure. So the core connections are the core confusions manifested in relationships, partnerships, collaborations. So it's really looking at how two pathologies, three or four pathologies come together. So if you have, say, a core confusion that is, arrogance and confidence, and then someone else has a core confusion, let's say critical and direct. And remember, just to that core confusions look exactly the same. They just have an entirely different effect. There's a positive side and a negative side to it, right? And the reason I call it confusions is because people don't, they don't know the difference, right? They just think, well, it's just me, and we're here to sort out all that. So we distill all this down, we distinguish this out. So it's really, really clear. So a core connection, as I said, so one might have arrogance and confidence, and one might have critical and direct. Actually, that's exactly what my wife and I have. So I just thought, I'm trying to make it like a hypothetical. Well, some people have, one person has this. No, it's an actual.
I have this friend.
I have this friend who's having an affair. I'd like to have some advice on that, if you don't mind. Yeah, I know. So just to bring it into the actual statement, my wife has critical and direct. I'm sure she's not listening to this because I don't think she's fully accepted her own pathology personally. So I will keep this just secret. So she has critical and direct, and I have arrogance and confidence. Surprise. So when arrogance is talking to critical, it's like a bloodbath in our house. And when direct is talking to confidence, it's magic. So that's how a core confusion and another core confusion intersect and play together. So, or not play together, if you will. The challenge also is really understanding for all things when your negative core confusion is at play. When I consider that the shallow end of the pool, we kind of all know when we're really engaged, really threatened, really triggered, even though we might not be able to get out of it with any kind of facility, or kind of get our head out of our ass with any kind of facility. We do know that we're upset, or we're feeling back on our heels, or however you want to say it. That gives you a better understanding of feeling reactive and threatened. But it's the shallow end of the pool that's which I consider when it's subtle, when it seems just like you're having where it looks like logic, and so many times. Your survival system, when you're threatened, can masquerade as logic or intelligence or common sense, when in fact it's really still being distributed by anxiety or fear or shame or something else. So it takes work to understand the subtleties of when you're threatened or engaged, because it produces pretty much the same effect as when you're really in the deep end of the pool. You just don't know that. So you could come in feeling like, I'm just going to have this conversation from the context of sanity and connection and love. And then there's this huge blowout. That's because there is probably some aspects of anxiety that's taking place that you haven't recognized or that you haven't noticed. So core connections are, as I said, they're your intersect in terms of partnership and intimate relationships, and understanding, as I said, understanding when that's occurring. And we don't use our intimate relationships in the context that they're designed for. And what do I mean by that? Most of us in relationships commit to our expectations. We really don't commit to, reflection. And there's a difference in when someone's reacting to you and someone's, having a different experience than you think they should be having because of what you introduced, right? That's you're not using their behavior, their language, their reactions, their responses, I should say, as reflection. You get defensive, you're going to get reactive. You have an expectation of how they should react, and that's the nature of partnerships. That's the nature of relationships. So in the core connections, it's really, you have to have a full understanding of your own core confusion and the subtleties of that. And I think you really have to feel that a lot of times more than think it through. You have to feel like, oh my God, that arrogance. I can feel like the kind of the twists and turns and the challenges and the need and all of these elements that might go into what arrogance looks like, and feel confidence. Like, what does that look like? And fundamentally, arrogance always manifests as the need to be seen as something that you're not, right? Or need to prove a point of view, that you need to be appreciated for your not. And a lot of the times you're pushing the need to be seen as more rather than to be seen as actually how you are. And confidence doesn't have any of that need, right? It doesn't have any of that requirement. So always recognizing the noise, that the commentary that's outside of you, which is my need to be seen as something, and realizing in confidence there's just no noise at all. There's no dialogue or inner commentary of what's required. You were just expressing yourself. So I'm using arrogance and confidence. I'm drilling down more into the subtleties of how this works. It becomes a little more dense, a little bit more harder to see.
I was going to say, what I love about the core connections is, in intimate relationships, you worked in Los Angeles for, and seen so many different types of relationships. Oh my God. I mean, the landscape you've seen is pretty. I want to read your biography.
There's a lot of stories in the dark city.
So, but one of the things is that core connections does simplify intimate relationships in a way where you just know where you're dense. And so when you're talking to your partner, where you might be susceptible to not having as much authority as you might think you have, right? And I think everyone thinks they have authority when they walk in. One of the things I really loved I think my wife and I first started working with you, he's like, Brian, don't coach your wife. Because when you come in, you have an agenda, whether you think so or not. You might be saying you're trying to help or you're trying to be the good husband, right? But there's an agenda operating there. And so I wanted you to maybe talk about the agenda that people have in relationships. And also, what is attraction, and how does it, so what are these other things that kind of play into this very simple view of, the wrong side of people talking to each other and why people think they look so right, if that makes sense,
Well, there's that's great, Brian. You only introduced about 17 different topics that I'm supposed to field.
Well,
what do I look like, a juggler?
Yes,
all right.
Please.
So let's see if I can actually answer, one at a time. First, I just want to finish up what I was saying with regards to feeling your way through a lot of this rather than thinking your way through this, because there's a physiological feeling that happens when you're threatened. And there's a physiological feeling when you feel free and liberated, and understanding that from a more feeling context than a thinking context is really useful. You can diffuse. So let's just keep going to arrogance and confidence and critical and direct.
Yeah.
If confidence is operating and let's say my wife has critical operating, confidence can diffuse that. it can actually diffuse the thing. And you watch that happen in arguments all the time, whether it be partnership, interrelationships, where someone is not engaged and they're listening in a way that actually diffuses, and they hear the person and they don't have no judgment about it, because confidence doesn't have any judgment. Arrogance will be defensive and dominating, right? So it'll keep something stuck. So you can diffuse a challenging situation when one side is when you're on the positive side, right? You don't get the magic, but you get the diffusion. Yeah. You only get the magic when both, when the two positives are talking to each other, and you only get the destruction when the two negatives are talking to each other. So just to give you another example, I also have intention and ambition. And that's another core confusion, because ambition is about like, oh, when I produce this result, it'll actually prove my value. So ambition's all about proving something, right? And intention's all about creating something. So that's also a core confusion: creation and creating and proving, right? So intention. It's I must sing, I must create, I must write, I must sell these houses, whatever it is. Like, it comes from inside out, and it's a passion, right? And ambition is about proving your value. Once you get this, you prove your value. So that's a core confusion. So I have intention and ambition as a core confusion, intention being the positive side, clearly, ambition being the negative side. And my wife has thoughtful and slow. So thoughtful is, when thoughtful is talking to intention, it's magic, right? Because there's a collaborative, creative conversation, right? And when slow is talking to ambition, it's like a bloodbath. I'm like, when is she going to, I'm like, God, she's like driving me crazy how long things are fucking taking. Excuse me. French. Is that French? When everyone says excuse me,
no, I'm
French,
pretty sure it's English. I think that's English.
I don't. It's English, but everyone says, "Oh, excuse my French," as if all the French, like the French, made up everything. Really, is that true? So
I think it sounds better in French. We should say in French because it sounds a lot better.
I don't want to do that. Okay, so anyway, so those are important distinctions. So to Brian's point, about chemistry and attraction. And what has this attraction? I call it dysfunctional chemistry. Usually that's what has us get together. It's like, I'm nothing and you're everything. Good, let's get together. Right? I'm a project and you're a project manager. Good, let's find each other. Right? I'm desperate, right? And you're needy. Oh yeah, could be fun. Whatever. So two dysfunctions usually get together, and that's what we call chemistry. That's what explains, like, how did these two get together? Well, because of that dysfunctional chemistry. There's something about it. So understanding, this is a kind of nature of relationships and partnership, understanding what the real context for something is key. Now, this is a little bit, off to the side, but, kind of Brian introduced it, and I think it's a really useful point. Meaning, if I'm going to if I'm going to the Four Seasons, I expect turn down service and chocolates and things like that at a hotel.
Nice, yeah.
And what is it, banging? Sorry. Can you hear that banging?
No, you're good.
Okay, well, that's good, because there's something banging. It's just the noise. It's just the noise in my head. It's not a problem.
I was gonna say, that's
right. It's just those little people with little tiny hammers.
We're starting to see the signs. We're starting to see the signs.
Exactly. Someone's mining something in my head. They're looking for gold. Okay, so anyway, what the hell was I saying? so I'm talking about that kind of chemistry.
The Four Seasons. So if you
go to the Four Seasons and you have a particular expectation, right, of what the service will look like, what's happening. Well, if you went to Syria or Afghanistan, checked into a hotel and expected the same kind of treatment, you'd be crazy. Now, it might be good for a comedy or something else, but you complain about the turn down service in Syria, you'd be nuts. Right. So understanding context and what something's for is absolutely essential. And most people, when they go into a relationship or a marriage, they're going in like, your job is to make me happy. And that's what occurs in the engagement process. It doesn't necessarily occur in marriage. Marriage is to reveal all the unresolved issues that comes up. Right. So really, if you go into marriage committing to getting reflection and evolution and development, you'll be happy. But most people, don't. They go in in a different context. And that's why dysfunctional chemistry, it's like, that's why two negatives, that's two dysfunctions make a function. So that's why when you actually you get together with someone and then finally you commit to that person, now what you're committing to is, how can I see what the other person sees? Because your issues only usually come up in those areas. They only come up in an intimate relationship because that's where they're founded. They're founded in a familial, trauma or dysfunction or whatever it is. So they're going to come up, when you're in a earlier similar situation, right? They're going to come up in a present time situation. So we're looking to heal those things together, and that's not an easy thing to do because we always want to be attractive and have people appreciate us, and so showing our deficiencies or showing the underbelly is challenging, and you really have to have trust that nothing will be used against you, and someone will assist you through that, and so attraction has a lot to do with dysfunction initially, and then it's like, how do you maintain that? How do you transform that as time goes on?
Well, and I think it just comes in naturally, right? I think the time I spent with my wife, it's hard to not be the real person or the real you after a while. You can't put on that face every day and hide like you might do in the world. And so intimate relationships, you expose the person you're with to a lot more of your behaviors than you would probably expose most people to.
Oh, and yeah. You never know what's going, they go, oh, they're such an amazing couple. Yeah. Really behind the scenes, what's really going on.
You shut the door and let's see.
No. Yeah. Cause everyone knows that that's a whole different story. And so the core confusions and the core connections, and today we're talking about core connections. So we're really talking about relationships. We're talking about how one operates in a relationship and how someone, what goes on and what comes up, right? And what has something endure and what has something sustain. And I don't know, but I've been, had my own, been divorced twice and married 3 times and had to really figure it out and get it right. And I was so bad at marriage that, I had to drill down. Now it's been many, many years, obviously, like almost 34 years that I've been with Jen. Right. And I think I'm just now getting, some intelligence and awareness around myself in that regard. And hopefully this is the deal. Hopefully that you get those lessons soon enough so someone doesn't leave. Right. I had burned through enough relationships like, I can't stay, but look, I finally got the lesson. Yeah, that's great. It's about 10 years too late, buddy. So go ahead.
I was going to circle back because the core connections are not just intimate relationships. So they could be family members. It can be coworkers. I mean, and core connections plays out
it can be
any relationship,
parent-child, because your karmic connection to your children is like, you're saying, I always say that children are the physical manifestation of every unresolved issue of their parents, right?
So
and
true.
Jen, my wife, would always say, that's the most brilliant quote you've ever made up. It's too bad you don't live like that, right? I'm like, excuse me, did you forget the reflection part, not the indictment part? Did you forget the compassion aspect?
We're supposed to be learning together, not be
didn't you understand? I'm sorry, I don't remember you, being my coach, right? Anyway, so understanding that's why we're using the core connections. This is all about having more tools, simplistic tools in a lot of ways to have a more sustainable, creative, healthy relationship in all your relationships. As Brian said, your partnerships, your business partnerships, your coworkers, parent, child, all of them. So the more that you understand this, the better. And then you get to also, someone isn't doing this work or doesn't know this, they get to, you get to see theirs in a more effective way. Right? You can always read someone else's behavior if you're not noisy yourself. You have the ability to perceive. Perception's a function that you don't have any noise or inner commentary going on, so you can actually read everyone else's noise. That's really what good perception is. rather than, if you have a bunch of noise in your head, and noise looks like, whatever you're threatened by or whatever you're trying to be or whatever you're trying to do. It's then you're just reporting on the noise in your head and calling it perception.
Well, one of the things that we're talking to that I think you phrased really well in the book that you're working on, the core series, is there are never just two people in a relationship or a partnership. There's an entire familial history and everything else. And there's nothing more heroic than the resolution and alchemization of your traumas in an intimate relationship. And I love that part of the book. I think
who said that? That's really brilliant. Whoever said that?
Somebody didn't you have a ghostwriter or something?
Who said that?
It's you.
But that's why you need like a California king. Because there's like 12 people in your bed, right? And you wonder, like, how come I'm being squished over to the side of the bed? Well, that's because, 7 of your multiple personalities are squishing me over here.
But that transformation that you're doing with that person, it looks a lot like the transformation you do with yourself, right? You just need to notice the difference between when you're both on the positive side of the tracks and you're both in the positive side of your core confusions and you're working together in those, or you're both on the negative side and you're colliding in that way, right?
Yeah, it's not easy when you're both engaged, right? It's just, pride and a few other dysfunctions like shame comes into play that keeps the narrative, stuck. Doesn't allow for any kind of real movement or real mobility. It's not easy, but there's nothing more intoxicating when you can hear another person without defense and justification, and the person feels seen and heard and understood, and then you evolve to the next context in your relationship. Your relationship expands to a more intimate, more creative, more loving, more playful place. That's the power of those moments when someone can actually hear and see the other person of what they might be dealing with. And, so much we deal with people's behavior rather than their essence or their chewy center or their commitment, right? We get stuck in the behavior much more often than not. But it's really important to understand that it's not just you get such liberation in the moment when you hear someone and understand someone and they feel heard and understood. It also moves you to the next level in your relationship. And that's why most relationships are devolving, because there's not enough upward mobility or movement or development that's going on. Pretty much people are having the same conversations over and over and over again and calling it, different. That's why I always say that every relationship breaks up from the same place. It always breaks up from, I know what you're going to say, I know how you're going to say it, I know when you're going to say it, and you're indicted with a historical kind of pinning that doesn't allow you to move or see or be seen in a different way. So you feel stuck. And whether people are having affairs or other things, that it's really that fundamental distinction, I think, where people feel so pinned and that they don't have any room to move or grow or develop. And then they meet someone else and that person thinks, oh my God, you're brilliant. You're so creative. You're so innovative. You're so loving. And they feel the oxygen and they feel the growth that's in the way that the people perceive them. So these are the core connections I think a simplistic way of coming at very complex behavior, because we're an interesting bunch. We're interesting animals, the human beings. Someone said this just a couple of days ago. They said, we're the only animals in the kingdom that keep our kids around till they're 18 years old. Everyone else hey, I hope you can. I think Chris Rock did it. I think that's
a good decision.
I think it's such a Chris Rock. I think it's a Chris Rock. I'm not going to do the imitation of Chris Rock. That won't be good. But I think it was a Chris Rock thing. He goes, "Hey, kick the little bird's being kicked out of a nest from 300 feet up. Hope you can fly." So so we create such codependence in so many different ways, and we don't have an understanding of that. So I just think there's This is an attempt, hopefully a successful attempt, at giving people a real entry level into and not just an entry level, but a specific tools to get at really, really complex behavioral material. So,
I want to maybe end on what you've quoted before around the fundamental core confusion in relationships that everyone has is privilege and rights and things and the way that moves. So maybe just talk to that when we can kind of conclude on that. I think that's a really powerful distinction for people to think about in their relationship.
So another core confusion is privilege and rights. So when you first meet someone, when you're first dating, it's all privilege. Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to take them out. And you're attentive and you're there. And very soon it moves into a right and right or expectations. Oh, you need to act like this, or I get to act this way, or I get to like not be so attentive, or I get to be this. And it's not that long. Sometimes those rights can come in within 6 weeks of dating. So the right is that it's I'm supposed to be treated this way. I'm supposed to be talked to this way. I don't have to do what I was doing anymore, right? I've already gotten, the prize or whatever that is. And so the attempt with all these core confusions is to stay on the liberated freedom side of the fence, if you will, and on the positive side. And so to stay in privilege, to sustain that for years. And you look at people who have relationships and marriages that last an enormous amount of time, you see the respect and the privilege that it is for them to be with. They feel honored to be with that person still, rather than it's a right that I should be treated this way. And the fact is, it is a privilege if you really think about it, because no one has to do anything for anyone, really. Just because you got married or just because you're in a relationship doesn't mean like, oh, this person owes me something. No, when people think, oh, I'm making the money, so you owe me this. No, that is absolutely where you watch people get victimized and have a really destructive relationship. So it is always a privilege when people, are generous in however they are. Right. And that means in terms of compassion or understanding that this area might be more difficult for you, or that this person's got more skills in this area. So the difference between privilege and rights is a powerful one. But as human beings, we move into rights all the time. It's interesting in terms of like the constitutional right that we have, which is, as far as I'm concerned, a highly destructive context is, that we have the right to be happy. It's in the Constitution. Right. It's our inalienable right. I'm like, really? Who the hell said that? Right. And then you look at people who are just pissed off because they're not happy. Right. We've got a condition like that. Like, what the hell? So that's a whole other, political, conversation that I'm not prepared to have. I'm just, but I'm just talking about the difference between privilege and rights, right? That's one of the things that I wanted to end with, because I think for myself, I look at my relationships I've been working on for years, and having that, getting to the place where I look at my wife as if it's a privilege to be with her. It puts me in the level of surrender, right? To all of the things that are banging away in my head, that noise about what I think I should be or what I should have, right? That, and then I just actually get to see the real person I have over there, which she's beautiful. I mean, she's a stunning, amazing woman. And, but you totally married way beyond yourself. Exactly. You married up. You totally married up.
And you're so jealous, man.
You married up, buddy.
Listen, I don't want to marry down. What was your recommendation? Marry down? Is that what you're saying?
So that's the whole kind of thing. That conversation about what's up and what's down. That's not. Yeah, that's another.
That's a different distinction.
That's a whole different game.
But that for me has been such a game changer. So I'm glad we finished on that. The core connections is brilliant because it's a very simple way to look at relationships. There's much more in the core series though. So I want to come back and keep adding on to a few more of these. We got the core constructs, there's core communications, there's others. And we'll come back and
core defaults.
Core defaults, right? So, but thank you, Breck. And we'll do this again.
Sounds good.
This has been a Gradients production.